That night, I took my wife to my friend's wedding. My wife looked very happy there, maybe even happier than I had seen her in a long time. I am a poor man, and my friend is a rich man. At the wedding, my wife's eyes sparkled, not only because of the music and the lights, but because she saw the life of luxury that my friend lived. She noticed the cars, the clothes, the big hall, the expensive gifts. I saw her smile in a way she never smiled with me. I felt something break inside me. When we came home and the night passed, the next morning we sat down for breakfast. My wife looked at me with a strange coldness and said, "Why are you so poor when your friend is so rich?" Her words cut me deeper than any knife. That moment I understood what was going on in her heart. She was not only admiring my friend's money, she had already started to love it. She had already started to see me as nothing compared to him. That very day I prepared divorce papers. The next morning I handed them to her. I told her, "If you love him so much, then go to him." I said those words with a trembling voice, but also with a heavy strength. My heart was breaking, but I didn't want to beg for love that had already left me. I am a 30-year-old man living in America. My life has not been easy. I grew up in a small house with small dreams. I worked at a local store, driving old cars, saving every dollar just to keep food on the table. My wife, Sarah, was the woman I thought would walk with me through struggles. When we married, I promised her a simple but honest life, but I could never give her the life she secretly wanted. She came from a middle-class family, and in the early days of our marriage, she seemed happy with my small efforts. We used to sit on the couch with cheap takeout food, laugh at silly TV shows, and share dreams that felt like ours. But as time passed, her eyes began to wander. She compared herself with her friends, who posted pictures of vacations, cars, and jewelry. She began to compare me with men who wore suits while I came home in my dusty work clothes. The wedding of my rich friend Mark was the final spark that lit the fire. Mark and I had been friends since childhood. He worked in investments and his life took a completely different path from mine. He lived in a big house in New York, drove expensive cars, and always had people around him. At his wedding, everything shined. The hall, the champagne, the diamond ring he gave to his bride. Sarah watched all of it with wide eyes like a child seeing magic for the first time. I could see her heart drifting away from me in that moment. When she told me at breakfast, "Why are you so poor when your friend is so rich?" I realized she had spoken what she had always felt but never said out loud. It was the truth she had been hiding, and now it was out. She no longer respected me as her husband. She no longer valued the love I gave her. I didn't argue with her that day. I didn't tell her about the nights I worked extra hours, the times I skipped meals to save money, the sacrifices I made so she could feel comfortable. I didn't remind her that money doesn't always stay, but loyalty does. I simply walked to my desk, took out the papers I had signed the night before, and placed them in front of her. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. "Go to him if that's what you want." Sarah stared at the papers in silence. For a moment I thought I saw regret in her eyes, but then she looked away. Maybe she was already dreaming of the world she thought she deserved. I went to work that day with a heavy heart. The sound of machines, the voices of customers, even the smell of coffee, everything felt far away, like I was walking in a dream. My marriage had ended not because of a fight, not because of betrayal I could touch, but because of something much colder. It ended because my wife chose money over love. That night, when I came home, the apartment was quiet. Sarah had packed a few bags. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't hug me one last time. She just left a short note. "I deserve more. I can't live like this anymore." I sat on the couch holding that note. My eyes burned, but no tears came. I had given her everything I had, and it was not enough. I thought about our wedding day years ago. I remembered how she wore a simple dress and held my hand with pride. She had looked into my eyes and said, "We don't need much. We only need each other." That memory now felt like a cruel joke. How fast people forget love when they see gold shining. The next few weeks were dark for me. I went to work, came home, ate alone, and slept in an empty bed. Every corner of the apartment carried her shadow. Her perfume still lingered on the pillow. I hated it, but I also held on to it because it was the last piece of her I had. Friends told me I should be glad she showed her true face early in life. They said I was still young, I could rebuild, I could find someone better. But when you love someone with your whole heart, moving on is not as easy as people say. The days after Sarah left felt like a storm had passed through my life, leaving silence, emptiness, and broken walls behind. I would wake up in the morning and forget for a second that she was gone. I would turn my head, expecting to see her hair spread across the pillow, her soft breathing filling the room. But the other side of the bed was always cold. That was the hardest part, realizing again and again that she wasn't there anymore. I dragged myself to work. I pushed through hours of lifting boxes, serving customers and smiling with empty lips. But every moment when my mind was free, her face came back. I remembered her laughter, the way she used to hold my hand while we walked, and the promises we once whispered in the dark. And then her words from that breakfast cut me all over again. "Why are you so poor when your friend is so rich?" Those words echoed in my head like a curse. I had heard insults in my life before. I had been called weak, foolish, unlucky, but nothing had ever pierced me like the realization that my own wife had measured my worth by money. I stopped eating properly. I lost weight. My clothes hung loose on me and my eyes carried dark circles. People at work noticed, but no one dared to ask. Pain has a way of showing itself, even when you try to hide it. One evening, as I sat alone at the small table in my apartment, I looked at the divorce papers again. She had signed them quickly, as if it meant nothing to her. Her name was written in black ink, neat and cold. That was all that was left of our marriage, 2 names on a document that ended everything. I thought about going to Mark, asking him if he had noticed how Sarah looked at him, but then I stopped myself. What good would it do? Even if he had no role in this, the truth was that Sarah's heart had already chosen wealth over me, and if it wasn't Mark, it would be someone else like him. The problem wasn't Mark. It was the hunger inside her for a life I could never give. One night I walked to the park where Sarah and I used to go in the early days of our marriage. We had once sat on a bench under the old oak tree, talking about our dreams. She had leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "As long as we have each other, we're rich enough." I remember those words so clearly. I remember believing them with my whole soul. Standing under that same tree years later, I realized how much of a lie it had become. Maybe she had believed it back then, or maybe she only said it to comfort me. But love that changes with money was never love to begin with. I looked at the couples walking hand in hand around me. Some were young, laughing, full of energy. Some were older, walking slowly, but with a bond that looked unshakable. I wondered which of those couples would last, and which would end like mine. Nobody can see the future, but money has a way of testing love. And in my case, love had failed. I started spending long nights at the diner down the street, sitting with a cup of cheap coffee, staring out of the window at strangers passing by. Sometimes I wrote in a notebook. I wrote about my pain, about Sarah, about the betrayal I felt. Writing became the only way I could release the storm inside me. One night, the waitress, an older woman named Linda, asked me gently, "Are you all right, honey?" Her voice carried a kindness I hadn't felt in weeks. I wanted to say, "No, I'm not all right. My wife left me because I'm poor. She chose money over my heart." But I simply smiled and said, "I'll be fine." Her small kindness made me realize how hungry I was for even a little bit of warmth. Sarah had taken all the warmth from my home, and I was left freezing inside. I began to notice something in myself. I was angry, but not only at Sarah. I was angry at the world. Angry at the way money controlled people, destroyed families, and measured a man's value. I hated that no matter how hard I worked, I would never be seen as enough without wealth. And I hated that the woman I gave my soul to had confirmed it with one cruel sentence. But in that anger I also felt a strange fire, a determination. If I had lost everything because I was poor, then maybe I could rebuild myself, not for Sarah, not for revenge, but for me. To prove that I was more than what she thought of me. The next weeks turned into months. I focused on work, but I also started taking small steps to learn new skills. I stayed late at the library, reading about business, about saving, about how people built themselves from nothing. Every page I read felt like a small piece of armor against the pain. Sometimes I still dreamed about Sarah. In my dreams, she came back, crying, telling me she had made a mistake. But when I woke up, the bed was still empty. Those dreams cut me deeper because they gave me hope, and then ripped it away. I never saw her again. She disappeared from my life completely, as if she had never existed. But in truth, she stayed with me every day. Her memory, her betrayal, her choice. I carried it all like a scar on my chest, and yet through that scar I began to grow. Pain changes a man. It breaks him, but it can also build him again, stronger, harder, and wiser. I was 30 years old, poor, heartbroken, but alive. And I promised myself that one day when I looked back, I would not remember myself as the man who was abandoned for money. I would remember myself as the man who survived it. As weeks turned into months, the silence of my apartment became part of my life. At first, it was painful. Every corner of the place whispered her name. Every empty chair reminded me of her absence. But slowly, that silence started teaching me something. It taught me to face myself. Without Sarah, without anyone to please or to prove myself to, I was left with only one question. Who am I now? I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized myself. My beard had grown thick and uneven, my eyes were hollow, and my clothes hung loose on my body. I realized that while Sarah had left me physically, I had abandoned myself. I had allowed grief to eat away at me, and that realization struck me like lightning. If I didn't stand up now, I would lose myself completely. So I began small. I shaved. I cleaned the apartment, throwing away things that smelled like her, things that carried her presence. At first it hurt to throw them, but as the garbage bag filled, I felt lighter. For the first time, I felt like I was reclaiming the space as mine. Work was still tiring, but I no longer dragged myself through it. I began treating every shift like a step forward, not a punishment. When customers handed me change or thanked me for service, I forced myself to smile, not because I felt happy, but because I wanted to feel human again. At night, I returned to the library. I devoured books about finance, small business, even personal growth. I wasn't a fast learner, but my hunger for change made me patient. Every page felt like I was building a bridge out of the darkness. I remember one evening, while reading a biography of a man who rose from poverty to wealth, I suddenly closed the book and whispered to myself, "Why not me?" For the first time in months, I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt possibility. But the road wasn't easy. There were nights when loneliness crashed into me like a wave. I would sit in bed, holding my head, feeling the weight of failure pressing down. My mind would replay Sarah's laughter at Mark's wedding, her cruel words at breakfast, her note that said, "I deserve more." Those nights I questioned everything. Was I not enough as a man? Was love really just about wealth? Would every woman see me the same way? I would walk to the park on those nights. Sometimes I sat under that oak tree for hours, listening to the wind move through its leaves. The tree stood tall, strong, unshaken by storms. I wanted to be like that tree. I wanted to endure, to stay rooted no matter what had been taken from me. One night as I sat there, I whispered, "I'm still here." It was such a small thing to say, but the moment I spoke it out loud, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't dead. I wasn't destroyed. I was still alive. And as long as I was alive, I could keep fighting. The following months brought changes. I started saving more carefully, cutting out every unnecessary expense. No more late-night takeout, no new clothes, no small luxuries. Every dollar went into a jar that I labeled future. It wasn't much at first, just a few bills and coins, but it gave me purpose. I also began working on small side hustles, fixing neighbors' furniture, running errands, even repairing old electronics I bought cheap and resold online. It wasn't glamorous, but each small success gave me confidence. I was building something of my own, step by step. I often thought about Sarah during this time. Was she happy? Did she get the rich life she wanted? Was she living in a big house, wearing diamond jewelry, laughing with friends who admired her wealth? Or had she realized that money doesn't fill the heart the way love does? I would never know, because she never called, never texted, never reached out. She had erased me as if I never existed. And maybe that was for the best. Still, part of me wondered if she would one day regret it. I imagined her years later, sitting in some cold mansion, looking at herself in a mirror, asking if she had chosen right. I wondered if she would remember me, the poor man who loved her more than himself. but I couldn't live waiting for her regret. I had to move forward. By the time I turned 31, I had saved enough to open a small repair shop. It was nothing big, just a corner space I rented with peeling paint and old shelves. But it was mine. I put up a sign that said, "Fix it right." That sign felt like a flag planted in the ground. It said, "I am still standing." The first weeks were slow. Some days no customers came at all, but I kept the lights on, kept the door open, kept believing. Slowly, people started coming in, an old woman with a broken radio, a teenager with a cracked phone screen, a man with a vacuum cleaner that wouldn't work. Each repair brought me a little more income, and more importantly, a little more respect for myself. One day, Linda, the waitress from the diner, walked into my shop with her broken toaster. She smiled when she saw me in the shop uniform and said, "Look at you, building your own place. I'm proud of you." Her words warmed me in a way I hadn't felt since Sarah left. Simple kindness, honest recognition, it felt like water on dry soil. Months passed and my shop began to grow. I wasn't rich, not by any measure, but I was no longer drowning. I was building a life that was mine, a life no one could take away, and then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, as I was closing the shop, I saw Sarah standing outside. My heart froze. She looked different, her hair styled, her clothes expensive, her eyes carrying both pride and a trace of shame. For a moment we just stared at each other. The world seemed to stop. She finally spoke. "You look different. You've changed." I didn't know what to say. My mind filled with memories, pain, anger, and longing all at once. Part of me wanted to ask why she was here, what she wanted. Another part of me wanted to turn and walk away, never to hear her voice again. She looked at the shop sign, then back at me. "I heard you started your own business. That's impressive." Her voice trembled as if she struggled between pride and regret. I simply nodded. "Yes, I'm building something." Her eyes softened. I just wanted to see you." And in that moment, I realized something. The man she had left, the poor, broken, defeated man, was gone. Standing here was a man who had survived her betrayal, who had fought through the ashes and built himself again. I didn't need her anymore. I looked her in the eyes and said, "You left me because I was poor, and maybe I'll never be rich, not like the life you wanted, but I'm strong now, stronger than I've ever been, and I don't need you to see that for it to be true." She blinked, tears forming in her eyes. For a second, I thought she might speak, but then she just turned and walked away. I watched her go without calling her back. For the first time, I didn't feel pain as she left. I felt peace, because I finally understood. Her leaving had not destroyed me. It had rebuilt me. After Sarah walked away from my shop that evening, I locked the door and stood inside for a long time. My hands rested on the counter, my head bowed low. For the first time in years, I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel like a victim or like a poor man whose worth was decided by someone else. I felt free. It was strange. For so long I had carried her shadow like a chain around my neck. I carried her words, her betrayal, her absence. But when she stood in front of me and I faced her without begging, without anger, without fear, I felt the chain break. That night, I went home to my small apartment. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, staring at the city lights. They flickered like 1,000 stories, each one different, each one filled with people chasing dreams, money, love, or survival. I thought about Sarah again, but this time with no hatred. She had made her choice, and that choice had shaped me into the man I had become. Without her leaving, I might never have found the strength to build my own path. In a strange, painful way, her betrayal had been my teacher. I whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you for leaving." It was not sarcasm. It was the truth. Her leaving had burned me, but through that fire I had been forged stronger. The days that followed felt different. I woke up with purpose. I went to my shop not only to repair broken things, but to repair the broken parts of myself. Every radio I fixed, every phone I brought back to life, reminded me that brokenness is not the end. Things can be repaired. People can be repaired. I began talking more to customers, listening to their stories, sharing bits of my own. Some of them opened up to me, telling me about their struggles. A single mother who worked 3 jobs, an old man who had lost his wife, a teenager trying to save money for college. I realized I wasn't alone in my pain. Everyone carried scars. Everyone was fighting battles nobody else could see. And in that realization, I found peace. Months turned into another year. My shop grew slowly but steadily. I hired a young assistant, teaching him the skills I had taught myself. Watching him learn reminded me of my own journey, and it gave me pride to know I was passing something on. One evening, as I closed the shop, Linda from the diner stopped by again. She smiled and said, "You know, I always believed in you." Her words touched me deeply. In a world where one person had abandoned me for money, another had shown me kindness with no expectation. That was the balance of life. Some people break you, others remind you that you can still stand. I was 33 now, no longer the young man who felt worthless at his friend's wedding. I was not rich, not powerful, but I had something better, peace of mind. I often thought about what lesson my life had given me. It was simple, yet heavy. Love that depends on money is not love at all. Real love stays when the pockets are empty, when the nights are cold, when the future looks uncertain. Sarah had failed that test, but maybe one day I would meet someone who wouldn't. Even if I never did, I knew I could live with myself. I had survived the worst storm. I had rebuilt myself from ashes. I had looked into the eyes of the woman who once crushed me, and I had stood tall. One Sunday morning I returned to the park with the old oak tree, the same place where Sarah once promised me that we only needed each other. I sat under its branches and closed my eyes. The wind touched my face softly like a friend. I thought about the man I used to be, the poor, broken 30-year-old who thought his life ended when his wife left. And I thought about the man I had become, the 33-year-old who stood on his own 2 feet, no longer afraid, no longer ashamed of his poverty. I realized something important. Poverty had not destroyed me. Betrayal had not destroyed me. What destroyed me for a while was believing I was worthless because of them. But the moment I stopped believing that, I began to live again. I opened my eyes, looked at the people walking in the park, families laughing, children running, couples holding hands. And for the first time in years I smiled, not because I had everything, but because I finally understood. I had enough. Life had broken me, yes, but life had also rebuilt me. And as the sun shined through the leaves of the oak tree, I whispered one last time to myself, I am still here. And that was enough.